The act of total transgression marks the decisive moment when there is no turning back, neither for him nor for the world he seeks to transform. It's the irreversible breaking point where what was potential becomes real and undeniable. He doesn't merely cross the line of morality and legality. He pulverizes it into 1,000 pieces, driven by a distorted and unshakable conviction that chaos is the only liberating truth and the only way to awaken society from its lethargy. His worldview is radically altered and inverted, like a shattered mirror reflecting a distorted reality. Morality is merely a social convenience, a fragile and disposable disguise for the most primitive and selfish instincts. Ethics are an illusion that crumbles under the slightest pressure. And rationality, so celebrated by humanity, is nothing more than a tool of control and oppression, used by the powerful to maintain their dominance. He doesn't see himself as a villain in the traditional sense of an antagonist, but as a revealer, a surgeon who exposes society's underlying sickness, even if it means cutting deep and without anesthesia. His actions, however shocking, brutal, and terrifying they may be to others, are perfectly justified by his own intricate anarchist philosophy. He doesn't just commit crimes. He orchestrates cataclysmic events with a macabre purpose, to challenge the audience to confront a disturbing and uncomfortable question that echoes in the void. What if he's right? The dilemma lies in recognizing the inherent fragility of social order and the terrifying possibility that, under the right conditions of despair and injustice, anyone can succumb to their own version of madness or awaken to their own dark and chaotic side. The broken windows theory, which suggests that visible signs of disorder can encourage more disorder and crime, resonates chillingly with his intent not just to break a window, but to demolish the entire illusion of social control and civility. He doesn't merely commit acts of vandalism. He dismantles the psychological and moral fabric of civilization, exposing its inherent fragility. His existence is now the radical antithesis of everything society preaches as correct, organized, and civilized, and he embraces it with an almost religious fervor, with a smile that chills the soul and a laugh that reverberates like a grim warning. The Joker's mind, far from being irrational in the sense of random or incoherent, operates with a disturbing yet internally and chillingly consistent logic. His madness is not a product of chance. It's a highly developed and perverse form of psychological anarchism, where unpredictability becomes his sharpest weapon and disruption his ultimate goal. Delving deeper into the analysis, we can observe how he utilizes principles of social psychology, neuropsychology, and even the sociology of deviance in a distorted yet incredibly effective way to achieve his objectives. He demonstrates an instinctive understanding of crowd psychology, the fragility of morality under pressure and chaos, and the ease with which people can be manipulated when their fundamental beliefs are shaken and their security is put at risk. His actions, though shocking and violent, are in essence grand and cruel social experiments, designed to prove his nihilistic worldview. He doesn't seek material gain, political domination, or fame. His true reward is the revelation of humanity's intrinsically chaotic and selfish nature, the tearing off of the mask that civility wears. Studies on human behavior in extreme situations, such as the Lucifer effect or the Milgram experiment, cognitive dissonance theory, and the psychology of obedience to authority, can be applied to understand how he forces people to confront their own hypocrisies and moral weaknesses. Comparing him to other characters who challenge order or seek it through authoritarian means, we realize that the Joker stands out due to his complete absence of material selfishness or pursuit of conventional power. His only reward is the collapse of social illusion and the emergence of the chaos he so passionately preaches as the only truth. He doesn't seek destruction for destruction's sake, but for the unveiling of what he believes to be the fundamental truth of human existence. That order is fragile, and anarchy is the natural condition. It wasn't meaningless madness. It was cold, precise, and inhumanly logical calculation, a plan to dismantle collective sanity. The trail the Joker leaves behind is not merely one of destroyed buildings or a list of physical casualties, but of shaken minds, compromised institutions, and a society forced to question its very foundations and principles. He doesn't need an army of loyal followers, for his actions are seeds of disorder planted deeply within the collective psyche, germinating into uncertainty and distrust. What remains after his passage is the bitter and persistent reflection on the fragility of order, the true nature of morality, and the latent darkness that resides within each of us, just waiting for an opportunity to emerge. How does this agent of chaos shape the world around him? He forces society to confront its own shadow, to admit that barbarity is a constant possibility, a monster that can reemerge at any moment from within us, fueled by the flaws of the system itself. The philosophical discussion deepens in a disturbing way. Who are we to judge his actions, when the very structure that governs us is permeated by flaws, hypocrisies, and injustices that he so brutally exposes? He is not merely a villain, but a symptom of a deeper societal illness. Existentialist philosophy, which emphasizes individual responsibility in creating meaning in a universe without inherent purpose, resonates with the idea that the choice between order and chaos is, ultimately, a matter of individual agency and how we choose to live in the face of existence's absurdity. The Joker doesn't merely seek to eliminate order, but to demonstrate that it is a fragile choice, a social convention built on sand, and not an unyielding natural imposition. And the cycle of chaos, once initiated, continues, echoing in every insane laugh the city hears, for perhaps he wasn't the last to awaken to this disturbing truth, and perhaps the seed he planted is still germinating in other hearts, ready to blossom into more anarchy. The journey into the Joker's mind forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The order we cherish so much might be just a thin, illusory layer over an abyss of disorder and anarchy. He provokes us, challenges us to question not only the world around us, but ourselves, our deepest values, and our own social masks. What is your hidden version of madness? And what if the ultimate joke is that, deep down, we are all capable of embracing chaos, or of seeing it as the only liberating truth in a broken world? Have you ever wondered what would drive someone to embrace absolute chaos? The Joker, one of the most enigmatic and disturbing characters in pop culture, doesn't seek wealth, power, or conventional recognition. He has a much darker and profound mission: to prove that social order is a fragile illusion and that mental sanity can crumble at any moment. In anyone, prepare to delve into the mind of a nihilistic anarchist, where life is perceived as a cruel and meaningless joke, and the line between lucidity and disorder is thin and easily broken. What you're about to see might change how you view society, its rules, and even yourself. In a metropolis like Gotham City, where social inequality is abyssal, systemic corruption and institutional neglect corrode its very foundations, an ordinary individual emerges, desperately struggling to survive. Before becoming what we know as the agent of chaos, he was just another face in the crowd, an invisible human being in a system that ignored and crushed him. Perhaps he was a failed comedian whose jokes found no resonance in a world that had forgotten how to laugh, a frustrated chemist with wasted talents, or simply a man overwhelmed by the relentless demands of a life devoid of any prospect for advancement or recognition. The Gotham that bore him and shaped him was not just a backdrop, but a character in itself, a stage of stark contrasts, where the obscene luxury of the few shone cruelly over the suffocating misery of the majority. The law was frequently bent, manipulated, and even ignored by those in power, while despair spread through the streets like a silent, incurable disease. Promises of progress and justice were mere distant echoes for those living on the margins, and the feeling that the game was rigged became deeply ingrained in his perception. It's within this environment of relentless pressures daily injustices, and shattered dreams that a man's psyche begins to be tested, layer by layer, under continuous and cumulative stress. The leaky bucket theory helps us understand the starting point of his journey toward disorder. Small drops of stress, frustration and humiliation, every public humiliation, every door slammed in his face, every sneering smile he received when trying to do good or find his place in the world, accumulated ceaselessly until his inner vessel overflowed. He lived constantly on the brink of an emotional and mental precipice, with every disappointment, every rejection, every act of external cruelty filling up his reservoir of anguish and resentment a little more. The idea that society, with its rules and conventions, was just, benevolent, or even functional, began to be relentlessly questioned in his mind. He saw the facade of order and civility, but he felt the rot and hypocrisy beneath it, the rot that was corroding Dodom's very soul. A growing sense of isolation and marginalization eroded his perception of belonging, pushing him further and further into the shadows of existence. But even immersed in this context of decay and disillusionment, there was something no one saw coming. A transformation that would defy all conventional logic and the very nature of humanity. A metamorphosis that would make the city tremble. The true tipping point arises when a series of catastrophic, interconnected, and relentless events push him beyond his limits of resilience and sanity. It's not a single isolated moment of misfortune, but the brutal culmination of devastating personal losses, public humiliations that crush his dignity, and the complete and utter failure of the system to offer any kind of support, understanding, or hope. Imagine losing the job that was his last link to normalcy, the illness or tragic loss of a close family member who represented his only genuine affection and connection, the relentless ridicule he faced in his genuine attempt to pursue a dream, perhaps on stage, where he sought recognition and laughter, only to be booed and humiliated, all while he perceives the complete and cold indifference of the world around him. A world that continues to spin as if nothing is happening, blind to his agony. This isn't just a trigger. It's an emotional tsunami that sweeps him away from his previous identity, severing the ties that bound him to society. The pain, unbearable in its intensity and persistence, transforms into a potent catalyst for the radical deconstruction of his personality. Internally, he grapples with overwhelming confusion, volcanic rage, and a sense of abandonment that corrodes his soul to its core. Externally, the world continues to ignore his agony, pushing him further into the darkness of marginalization and despair. Trauma psychology, especially cumulative and complex trauma, offers crucial insights into understanding this transformation. Extreme and prolonged stress can trigger defense mechanisms that profoundly alter the perception of reality, leading to a radical reevaluation of values and beliefs. Sanity, once a pillar of his existence, becomes a fragile and hypocritical convention. A mask he feels is no longer worth wearing. The break with normalcy, with everything he once knew and valued, is the first step towards the emergence of something new, disturbing, and irreversible. It's as if his mind undergoes a brutal re-engineering, redefining what's normal and acceptable, and in its place, a new, unsettling logic is born. And it was there, at that point of no return, where the light of hope completely faded, that everything began to fall apart, and a new being, an avatar of chaos and disorder, began to rise from the ashes of the old, ready to strike a match in Godom. From the abyss of despair and disillusionment, a new persona begins to solidify. This isn't random madness or an irrational collapse in the conventional psychiatric sense, but rather a restructuring of the mind around a dark logic that is disturbingly coherent and functional within its own distorted universe. Facts and statements that were once unthinkable, shocking, or even self-destructive for the man he was, now become authentic and incisive expressions of his new worldview. His laugh, once a defense mechanism, transforms into a disturbing manifestation of his pleasure in anarchy. He no longer merely reacts passively to misfortune. He observes society with a clinical, almost scientific gaze, identifying the cracks in the facade of morality, the fissures in institutions, and the hypocrisies that sustain apparent order, like an external observer dissecting a failed social experiment. His actions are no longer impulsive or irrational in the traditional sense, but meticulously calculated to expose these flaws and provoke a chaotic response. He becomes a master of psychological manipulation, using irony and absurdity as his weapons. The idea that life is a sick and cruel joke, utterly without ultimate meaning, becomes his mantra, a powerful way to rationalize the inherent cruelty and absence of purpose he now perceives in everything around him. Within his mind, the logic of disorder gains form and depth. If life possesses no inherent meaning or purpose, if everything is absurd and arbitrary, then the imposition of rules, laws, and moral values is, in itself, the greatest of farces and an unnecessary restriction on true, selfish human nature. The philosophy of existential nihilism serves as a perfect lens to understand this perspective, where values and purposes are considered mere human constructs without any real or transcendental foundation. He sees himself not as a common criminal, motivated by greed or personal revenge, but as a catalyst, a relentless mirror reflecting humanity's true, brutal face back to itself, stripped of its civilizing masks. He believes he is liberating people from the illusion of order and morality, unveiling the truth, even if that freedom comes at a terrible and painful cost, and through suffering. But the true agent of chaos was still dormant, awaiting the right moment for his complete and terrifying manifestation, the final act of his grand experiment.